A mysterious and powerful air fortress is threatening the planet Farmel. The destiny of Farmel rests in the abilities of one specially trained person, code number 82592-HAL Bailman. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
I'm 6183441 Joe.
No dash. No dash between the numbers and Joe.
You think I would have a dash?
I mean, yeah.
At that point, right? Might as well, right? It's like a little more robotic.
I think it's more of a Bailman, not like Bailman. Like Hal Bailman sounds more.
Hal is
right.
the name of the company, right?
Yeah, but like, it could also be the name of a person.
I was trying to make it sound like Batman. Like, you know, like Bailman.
Bailman. Yeah.
You know, like Bailman. And it's like, not that this matters at all, right? Like, I don't think Bailman isn't an identity as much as, you know, the orange astronaut is.
Well, I think if you're a Bailman, then you're really just like a bail bondsman that has some ideas about how important your job is.
Well, he's from the planet Farmel, so he probably bales hay.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that slight chuckle. I appreciated that.
This is not an unusual one for us, but it is like, you know, half shmup, half action adventure, kind of like what we saw with the Guardian Legend way back when, if you guys remember that Essential game. And I feel like this game very neatly like breaks itself up into three different categories. And so it does like all the easy homework of me taking notes and stuff like that. And instead, we can just break this game down from its specific parts, because ultimately it's just a loop of someone who is on a ship exploring the outside of the air fortress, has to, you know, shoot them all up to get inside the air fortress, explores the inside of said air fortress, finds the core, blows up that core, and then the, you know, third remaining piece of this all is that they then have to find the escape ship before the explosion. Rinse and repeat throughout each of the air fortresses, and you have yourself a game known as Air Fortress.
And yeah, I know that we've played quite a number of games that like has like different genres sort of mashed into each other, but this one, at least in like the last two, between the, you know, action adventure, just sort of explore and then leave in your ship, like this was something that I just did not expect. This whole like find a thing to destroy, but you better know how to get out of there was really well done, in my opinion, in terms of like actually giving you a different feeling like in a game. Like there's actually like a sense of urgency. I thought that was really well done. I don't know like what your first impression was when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of my, you know, my favorite things about this game is that the context that gives you that urgency is like, oh shit, like you blew up the ship. Like in any other game, it's like, oh, blow up the ship. All right, you won. Blow up the base, you won. Like, no, you have to get out. You have to get out of the base before it blows up. And like that simple context really does make you, you know, have that sort of heart-pounding escape sequence. It did surprise me too, because the first fortress, you know, it just teaches you how to do it. So it's like you blow it up and the exit's right in front of you, and you're like, oh, okay, I can just get out of here. But then like later on when you gotta, you know, I've came across the exits a lot on my way looking for the power core or whatever, and like you have to make a mental note, like, oh, the exit's here. I gotta remember how to get back to this before I destroy it.
Yeah,
kind of cool.
Each level has its own like mini Metroid ending, where, you know, that's like a common trope in Metroid games. After you just killed Mother Brain or whatever, you have to now escape the planet. You know, there's usually like a timer, actually, like 2 minutes or whatever, to find your way back to the beginning. And they just did that for each level here. However, I feel like, you know, I said that as the last thing, but we need to kind of rewind here and go back to the beginning and talk about, the side-scrolling shooter portion of this, because that's like the first thing you're introduced to, right? Before you even find out that like you're actually going to be going inside this air fortress and taking on like enemies and I guess some little levels of, figuring out like where to go, maze-like, if you will. Before that, you're in like a space scooter, I guess. I don't know what he's, like the way he's laying on it. It's like it's just very strange. He's laying completely on his belly on this like, scooter sounds good to me.
No. It's obviously like an electronic like Segway,
which is just as badass as a.
I think it's more badass.
Here's the thing that I thought was funny is that it shows at the beginning of each of these levels, it counts down and it shows what looks just like a regular spaceship. But then, like, as soon as the level starts, your guy is, like, mounting it like that. So I'm thinking it's just a spaceship, and the guy saw it in the catalog and was like, wow, this looks great. And then it got there and it's like, it's tiny. And you can't get inside it. You gotta hug it from the top.
I'll get from the top. How you get on a bike.
Yeah,
you just, hug it from the top.
Any biker gang will tell you, hug it from the top.
It's a good idea though, Joe. Like, why didn't they just make it a more recognizable like ship sprite and then just have your guy walk out of it when it's time to board the air fortress? Like, they do show a completely different sprite for like moments.
That's what confuses me. I'm like, oh, this is a ship, and then as soon as the game starts, it's just a guy riding a thing.
I think maybe this is, they were trying to. I can't explain the disparity between what it shows and what you are, but maybe the reason why they made it like this is because bikers are cool. Maybe you wouldn't describe something as like hugging it from the top, but
that's what makes bikers cool, is all the hugging.
True.
All right. So in terms of, shmups, we've had our range of like bullet hell and, different settings other than space and stuff like that. This particular, if we're referring to this as a shmup, this particular one, very easygoing for the most part. The enemies come in very distinct waves, and there is time between them. And there's not, like, any more enemies other than, like, 8 at a time. And I know it sounds like a lot, but because they come in a very distinct pattern, it's not, like, something that you won't be able to deal. They basically come in straight lines, and then later they have, like, homing versions of themselves. But for the most part, I thought this was just a cool, like, setting for or explanation for like going into the fortress. Like, they didn't do too much work here in terms of like shmup design and stuff like that, but rather than just show you entering the next fortress or whatever, they made it into a part of the game, which is like a neat little like pat on the back for the game. It's not like I didn't love the shmup section, but it was like better than not including it.
I mean that's sort of the yin and yang to it. Is the way that I would describe it is just perfunctory. Like, it's there only to give context again to what you're about to do. It's not a particularly good shmup. If this was all this game was, it would be the least unique shmup we had played in a long time. But yeah, like when you take it holistically, it makes a lot more sense, and like I don't have a problem with it. It's just that as a shmup, it does not really do that much.
Yeah, one thing though that I do think, because I totally agree, it's a very, very basic shmup. It moves kind of slowly, which makes it easier than a lot of other shmups. But one thing that I do think it does nicely is that it gives you an opportunity and a reason to be collecting all that energy and your energy and your bombs that you need for the later levels we were talking about, which makes it like it gives it some significance other than just setting up the context where how your time inside the air fortress goes will in some way depend on how well you perform in the shmup. Which I thought was like a nice addition to make it feel at least a little bit more important, especially with how much bigger the rest of the game feels than the shmups.
Yeah, that's important because the energy and bombs can only be collected in the shmups portion of the stage. So whenever you go inside the fortress, there's no additional energy or bombs to collect, but the energy that you like get, like let's say you can get up to 1,100 energy in before you enter the air fortress, then you can always like rehabilitate yourself back to that level, which is great, rather than if you didn't collect anything and you go in there with 200 energy, you're basically on a suicide mission based on the rules of how energy is expended inside the air fortress.
To be clear, there are rare times where you can find energy and bombs inside the air fortresses, but those are more like for when you're like, oh my god, you're in desperate need of a little bit of energy. But beforehand, it's like you want to build up your energy to prepare,
Yeah, and I do like that. Like it and again, like when I described it as perfunctory, that's just the mechanics of the actual shmup. But what it does, the role that it plays in your actual like game session, it's something that I haven't seen before on the NES. Like there's a specific like preparation stage, and that is just like sort of coded in the shmup gameplay, and that's actually a lot. Like when you talk about like this like multi-stage gameplay, that like I guess like we actually did play something like it recently with Dragon something or other. Flying Dragon, where but like that kind of preparation, it is only really in the plot, where you've got your action scenes and then you've got your fighting, but there's no actual, you have to get through it, and no matter how you get through it, you're going to end up at your actual fight in the same state. Whereas this one, your performance actually determines how you're going, like the resources that you have to perform in the action sequences. So that's kind of crazy, just how unique that is.
Yeah, and I think they, besides making it a little easier, right? Because the bombs and energy are mixed between plain sight, risk and reward, where you can see them and you're like, oh, cool, if I just, try to squeeze through this corridor, because granted, if you touch things in this, you're automatically dead. It is a one-hit KO. Granted, you do just respawn where you are, assuming you have lives for it, but there is that risk there of like, do I go through these tiny corridors, or I see enemies are this way, should I go for the energy? But for the most part, that stuff is handed out to you, but then there's also specific enemies that you and I can't tell if it's random or not. I didn't play the game thoroughly enough to decide, but like they can give energy and bombs too, so there is a reason to fight again, to fight back and to look for this stuff. And if you get enough, like if 1100 energy really is like a ton to work with in a game like this, where the shmup level, the fortress level, like as you continue to rinse and repeat that, they get increasingly longer, but for the most part they are just short bursts of gameplay where if as long as you come in appropriately equipped, you're going to be able to work with what you have.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't finish this game because there is definitely a difficulty curve, and the further that you get into each base, the more like labyrinthine the levels are. So at the beginning, yes, I totally agree that 1100 more than enough, and maybe the way that the difficulty increases isn't so much tied to like your energy expenditure later on with the later levels, and it's more just how like the game, how the levels are designed and how long they are. But I definitely do think that while it's very generous in the amount of energy that it gives you, like this is still, as it goes on, kind of a difficult game.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too, because when I started playing this, I was like, okay, this is just like a really easy shmup. When I got to the other parts, like, okay, it's not just a shmup, but it's still pretty easy. I also didn't complete this game, but I did start when it started to get too difficult and I wanted to play a little further. I started looking up some of the passwords to load save files or whatever you want to call that, and I played a couple of the later levels, and it is hard. I can confirm. The shmup levels, I think even in the later ones aren't like too hard, but as far as shmups go, I mean, I'm going to say something nice about shmups now. So, so mark this down on your calendar, because I don't say this stuff often, but
for today.
for all the things that like I don't like about shmups, one thing is that they're almost never like completely broken like some other genres. Like, like most of the time if you make a shmup, it's going to work. So like this shmup like these shmups going into it like being not all that crazy or in advance, it still functions as a shmup. It still works. Maybe that's why I don't like them, because they get a little boring to me. But I don't think this shmup has. I think there's not really much flaw to find for me with the shmup, other than it's kind of easy. But it functions like comparatively to some other genres, like even platformers. Like I feel like half the platformers we do, it's like, well, these controls just suck. Like or like the way this feels is just terrible. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I get what you're saying. Like that. Like the worst thing that a shmup can be is just bland. And while I agree with you most of the time, like I agree that applies most of the time. Like I remember like the earliest of them like did have pretty terrible controls. But now that we're in this, like, the rules for a shmup are kind of set in stone. Like now, like the cardinal sin of a shmup, that since we play these games week to week, is that like it feels like every other shmup. But like it's the fact that it's like sort of it's like a tertiary goal of this game is the shmup gameplay. It's easier to forgive that.
It's very basic in design, and I think that's fine for this kind of game. I could think of ways to expand on it, and I'll mention that later on ideas I had. But I think for the most part of just, a cycle where you are in this shooter section, and then you dock the bike or whatever it is, the ship, and then go inside the air fortress. The point of the game, I think, is really about taking down these air fortresses, exploring the labyrinths, finding the cores, and then escaping. So this part of the game is almost, a nice break away from just a worse version of this game that would have been just, stage one, and you're right inside the air fortress, and then as soon as you destroy the core, it just goes stage two, and it's another similar looking air fortress, granted with longer puzzles, but like, the only thing that changes really is like the color of said air fortress, or maybe like the introduction of an enemy or two. So let's pretend that, you've completed the shmup section here, and now you've docked, now you're inside the air fortress. The action section of this game, where you are now just as the astronaut inside the air fortress, it has a lot of like interesting rules too about just like how exploring the air fortress works. I think the first one to talk about is just the way that you expend your energy, because that energy points that you collected, that was unclear to me at first, that any time you move or use your jetpack, that requires the energy system to drain ever so slowly. And yes, if you freeze up and pause, you can gain some of it back, but it's not it's something you have to think about. It's almost like a timer, where whenever you're moving, time is moving, and whenever you're not, you're in the clear.
Yeah, it's I found that very interesting. Basically, however many energy pellets that you collected in the shmup phase, that adds up to, you might even, when you're in the shmup phase in the first go around, think that that's just your score, if you hadn't read the manual. But then when you're in this actual like action sequence, like that is just, these are your calories. Like you can burn them, but like if you stop, they'll refill back to where they were pretty quickly. But if you get hit, if you take damage in any way, that brings your total down, and it also like adds a kind of like mystery factor as to like how much damage you've taken, because it doesn't really reflect if you've already been expending energy. Like just the next time you kind of fully refill, it'll show you like what your max tank is now. But yeah, you can jump, you can shoot, you can move. All those things take energy. And one thing that I really liked about this phase is the fact that you your shooting has recoil, and it's like crazy recoil that moves your entire body. And this just like adds another like method of playing, like that you can get creative with your maneuvering and like shoot behind you to move forward and like shoot to dodge other enemies. And I really liked the way that this phase felt. I don't know how you guys felt.
Yeah, particularly because that kickback comes either exclusively or at least much more prominently when you're flying with the jetpack, which is what that feels so natural because you're in the air and it's pushing you back through the air. It's almost like you can just propel yourself backwards through stages like that. It feels really really natural and good to work that way.
Especially because it's part of the movement, right? Like the jetpack has its own feel of weight to it, but so does the shooting. That I feel like because they made moving something that like counts as a timer, right? And it's a race against you of like thinking about how much you're going to expend to get through to find the core or whatever. And granted, a very first level is like an introductory stage where I don't think you can make any wrong turns necessarily. It just shows you the idea of these concepts. But even then, it's a very quick understanding of what the energy means, right? And how you move. But also they try to create different sections for the air fortress too. Like it's not just like, oh, here's enemies on the screen and deal with them. It's like they give you some enemies first, then they give you these like cylinder platforms that like move around and they'll presumably hurt you. So you have to wait for them to pass by before you can accurately move through them and fit through the little corridors that they give you. Then there's like the fire that knows when you're nearby, so then it starts spraying fire out so that you have to take it down while it's further away so that if you want to avoid damage. Granted, you can also just bypass all these things, right? Like you can take the hit and you won't die. It's not a one-hit KO thing. It's based on your energy. So you can kind of assess too, like how much damage do I want to take to just move on through this and not deal with these enemies or whatever, especially once the core has been blown up. But at the same time, it all comes with a trade-off. Like I think that's what I appreciate so much about the design of this game is, everything has a counterbalance to it as well. So you can take your time. The game is never forcing you to move very fast, except for after you've blown up the core, rightfully so. But you can take your time with the game, but you can also be rewarded for moving quickly.
To weigh in on the whole energy thing, I feel like that's something that we've seen in other games that I usually don't like, where like your energy is constantly expending, or a lot of times it is a timer, but like this is functionally a timer, even though it's not exactly that. But the reason for me that it works here and it doesn't in other games is that it can't just run out and then you die. So it doesn't feel like you're fighting against this clock or this countdown.
Like a typical timer.
Yeah, even if you get really low, that just means now you have much less health. Like you can still keep shooting, and you can still keep flying with your jetpack. Like you're not locked now, or like soft locked in the game because you can't fly anymore because you're out of energy. It's just now your energy is stuck and it won't go below. Like if you're down to like 20 or whatever. Okay, now you can it'll only refill up to 20, and pretty much one hit from anything will kill you. So it make you get weaker as it goes on, as you expend your energy. Like really, that's functionally what's happening.
You won't really be able to maneuver either.
Well, what do you mean with the jetpack?
Yeah. Like if you hit 20,
I thought that you still could fly even when you're at minimum. You could just keep flying, which is kind of a strange choice, I think. But
I guess maybe I didn't notice that.
Yeah, but it's still it basically all what it functionally does is just make it's like another way to make the levels get more difficult the further you get into them.
So one of the things about that playing this game made me realize is that a lot of the games that we've played that seem to have a little bit less thought put into their design, like their levels are designed in a way that like they didn't really take the character's maneuverability or like move set into account. Like you've got games that have platforming where like just the way that you jump feels wrong. You've got games that just like their speed at which they move like doesn't seem to gel with the levels they've designed. Whereas like in this game, my favorite thing about it was the fact that a lot of the obstacles that are put in front of you and just the design in general like is 100% geared towards the abilities that you have in terms of moving around. Like in the very first level, you'll encounter enemies that are on platforms that are also in front of walls that on the back side of them, like if you're facing the enemy, the wall will be behind you. On the back side of those walls are spikes, but you're shooting at these enemies to clear them. And if you are to shoot them in like the wrong way or too fast, you will just shoot yourself into the spikes. And I'm like, this is great. Like this is your control scheme and your level design getting into synergy here. And I just wanted to kind of nerd out about that real quick. Just that everything sort of falling into place there.
Yeah, I noticed that specifically too, and that also hit me like the same way. I was like, wow, they care about this.
And at the same time, the air fortresses, even though they get larger and the enemies are more thorough, I guess, in the amount of damage they'll expend on you and stuff like that. It's not as basic as the shooter, but the idea of exploring the air fortress doesn't increase in ways that, like, even the NES, the way that we know it through exploration of other games, could have maybe drawn upon. Like the idea of just navigating through these fortresses and finding these, there's the elevator doors that then bring you down to the next section, and then you deal with that section, so on and so forth. You move through pipes or whatever. There's never any kind of, like, I don't want to say puzzle solving, but there's not even any like backtracking or like locked doors that you then have to like find out, like, the button's over here, right? Like, these are things that they would have had to add in, of course, but it doesn't ever get any more complex than that. And I'm not saying that makes this like useless, but it does remind me again too that, like, at the end of the day, it's a very simple idea that is very well executed.
Yeah, I think part of that is also because there's no like additional weapons or power-ups to find. You don't really evolve your character throughout, and I feel like in a lot of other games like this, like, that's what you would be backtracking for or sidetracking to, is like get a new gadget or get some new weapon. This really has a lot of like the way the levels evolve as you go is like through more branching paths, but all the like inessential branches sort of lead to nothing. Which makes it feel to me like there's something a little lacking.
Yeah, I guess like if it were to have stuff like that, it would be more of a Metroidvania, which this we haven't really decided yet. We've just sort of made some comparisons. This decidedly is not one of those, and I guess if they added stuff like that and slowed the pace down, because this is sort of a cycle of quick exploration and then escape based on the knowledge of the level that you've just explored. Like, it's sort of going for a different thing here. And one thing that I guess I kept drawing comparisons to, even though I know it very much is not like this, I kept getting like Hotline Miami vibes. Like, it's just very quick. You sort of like there's like you don't really get any exploration bonuses. It's just like you go in, you find the optimal route, and then you get out. And that's, I guess, just a more modern game that I'm drawing comparisons to.
No, and I think that's a good point, because I think you have to decide. I'm thinking about Balloon Fight, right? That's an essential game, right? And that's a very basic game that never really evolves in concept. It's just simple enough, and it's a fun enough execution that it's something that is is timeless because they made it easy enough to execute and easy enough to understand, but there is some fun things going on there. I'd argue here that Air Fortress, it draws a line into how far it wants to go on its own accord, right? Like they could have made this a Zelda-like, right? Or I wasn't thinking other power-ups, but they could have done that stuff too. And they chose not to. And you always refer back to after you get escape from an air fortress, they bring you back to the main screen where you see all of the air fortresses, and it's a very straightforward line, and that kind of reminds me of like a Star Fox layout, where in the game Star Fox, it shows you every planet you're going to go to, and granted that one has branching paths, which I think would have been cool for this too, but they show you everywhere you're going to go to, and then you're just following along, and it's like that's the progress that you're making here, and I think, whether that's enough or not, I definitely think like they've included enough stages. It's definitely, it's not a short game by any means, but it's a short burst of gameplay each time you go through one of these fortresses. The fortresses that I played through, at least, did not drag on. They didn't overstay their welcome, and it was possible to kind of, either keep a mental map or remember obvious landmarks within these labyrinths, which is important, right? Because we've played games like Deadly Towers where everything looks the same and you have no idea you've entered one door and you're not even sure what door you entered through, let alone like what's different because it's the same exact level layout. Like here you can tell where you've been.
That's so important too, because this game would have been a nightmare to play if that weren't the case. And it's not like they did themselves any favors by making it like there's no each map, like each little sub map in this game like doesn't have any like real life parallels. Like a lot of games, they have landmarks because like, oh, this one is obviously the bar, or this one is obviously like a throne room or something along those lines. All this game is a series of mini maps, like little mini labyrinths. But because like they all look kind of different, they're laid out different, whether that's like they used a different wall background or a different color for the walls or just a unique sequence of enemies, like you're able to know like, oh, I've been here before and I need to exit via this way to get to where I need to go. And I think that's kind of hard, especially when you mention games like Deadly Towers. It makes you appreciate it a bit more.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about it, because on the one hand, I do feel like for there to be these branching paths, at least for my personal preference, for it to be satisfying, I want things on the other end of it. I want something, whether it's a punishment or a reward, punishment other than just being lost. I understand that would make this a totally different game, but it feels like they like took one step in that direction by making these branching paths that like don't do any, like it feels like they almost started to try and make it like a Metroidvania or something where you explore now. So like that sort of felt like a little like it was a little bit missing something to me. But then on the other hand, I do get that having these branching paths is like a means to give you an opportunity to get lost, because a part of this game is to have to find your way out. That's what creates that urgency. So like for that, like, so there is merit in those branching paths for that, because without those branching paths, it would be a lot easier and you'd feel a lot less of that panic when it's time to get out. I just wasn't sure that it was like, I don't know. I kept going back and forth weighing whether or not like the pro of me having that like, oh my God, panic moment, like that fun, exciting moment of getting out, was enough of a pro to outweigh like some of the frustration I would get through the regular level when I was just like, I'm just getting lost to get lost here. And I don't know, it felt a little unnecessary at times.
I don't know if it changes the game so much, though, like makes it a new genre. Like Metroidvanias are defined by like finding new equipment that then becomes more useful in other areas, right? Like now all of a sudden you can go back to where you've been and do new things and find new, new ways to open up other doors or do a thing that you couldn't do before, or there was a power-up you saw but you didn't know what you needed yet. That can all be done there. I don't think this game needs to change like on that level. But imagine if it was a little bit more like the Guardian Legend, and this was not 8 separate air fortresses, but was one giant air fortress that you kind of travel around, find, depending on branching paths, like find other spaceships that then like activate the shmup sections more frequently. But ultimately, you're just trying to find one of maybe many branching paths that lead to the particular core that you're trying, of this air fortress that you're trying to get to. Like, I know I'm describing a game that isn't Air Fortress, but I don't think that like puts it in another genre. I just think that gives it more of a chance to not separate and segment all of these parts together, making everything feel like maybe more of a complete picture.
So I think you kind of are describing a different game, because if it's sort of like that, and this is an exploration game, basically what you end up with, if you make that game, is this is an exploration-based game that's actually pretty low stakes for most of it, and then has like a big set piece at the end. Whereas this game like lives and dies by its loop, and like it's supposed to be something that you can ingest. The passwords are there, like in chunks of these little air fortresses, and the fact that like I see it more as a heist game. Like you go in and you do some recon, and then like the big exciting part is trying to escape. And I think like the fact that it happens on this like regular frequency, and you're going to fail most of the time, or if you do fail, you're going to fail on the escape. Makes it a different kind of game than what that's describing. I don't know if I'm being entirely clear with how I'm describing this, but
no, I think you make a great point, and I think it's time to talk about the escape sequence, because that really is like you said, that's the oh shit moment of the game, and it's like something that it happens so early on in the first fortress that you get a taste of it, and now you know that that's going to just continue to be expanded upon in each fortress. Like the idea of like, all right, well this time the ship was right next to me, but next time, who knows how far I'll have to go, and it does keep getting further and further away from you, and eventually you'll start to notice you might not notice it the first time around, but if it takes you long enough, the screen starts to like shake, things start to seem like they're falling apart. So I do think that you make a good case for it. I think what I was trying to say, just to clean up that last patch, is it is a different game. I totally agree that that's not Air Fortress, and Air Fortress is doing something different. I was just trying to keep it in the same genre of game, like not try to add any additional things to it, but maybe not break up the actual game so much into stages and segments, and just make it more of an overall exploration. But I agree with your point. Let's talk about this, blow up the core thing. First off, the core itself, not really a boss fight by any means, but they do make it, very similar to Metroid's Mother Brain fight, where the core is capable of shooting things at you, but there's also enemies that you have to deal with too. Did these core fights feel like boss fights to you guys?
Not the first few, because it was literally just shoot at them. Like, they don't shoot at you or attack you at all. Later on, there are other enemies in the area, or like turrets in the area that shoot at you, and that makes it a little more challenging, but pretty sure everything...
Don't they shoot fireballs, Joe?
Not the main cores, at least not the first two.
Okay.
There are cores that look like they look the same, but they're a little smaller and they're blocking.
No. I'm talking about the actual big core, though.
Yeah, the one that looks like a giant fireball.
Yeah. I think we're just exchanging thoughts. Like, you might be right that they don't do it for the first two, but they definitely do it later on. The cores do.
Okay, I thought later on it was always other things in the room that were shooting at you.
Those exist too, though. Yeah. For me, I didn't end up spending too much time with the cores, because I was saving up my. One thing we didn't mention is, in addition to energy, you would pick up these
bombs.
I guess they're bombs, but they call them something else in the deep lore of the game. But they're just, really heavy shots that you have a limited amount of. And I would just save them for the core, and I guess some other like more pesky enemies. But my core fights were usually pretty simple, and it was just like, do I want to blow this up now, or do I want to do a little bit more recon, and back out, so that I know where I'm going. So that's how I approach them. They're definitely not boss fights, though.
Yeah, I felt the same way. Like that was what was giving it like some challenge. It was like, yeah, it was like a decision I had to make, or I had to think like, can I remember where to go? I will say one thing, little issue I had, and I'm curious if you guys ran into this, but on the second core, I shot at this thing for like 10 minutes, and it didn't blow up. I mean, literally, like I was just shooting it. I was like, am I so weak that I need this many hits? Should I have saved my bombs for this? Eventually, I looked up a password and loaded a save state. Because I had beaten the level. I knew my way out, but I just could not. And I was watching a video of it. The guy did exactly what I did, and he just shot it like, 10 times or whatever. I was shooting it forever.
Are you sure it
like
wasn't
just
a
over
wall?
and over again? I'm sure it wasn't the wall. It was definitely a core. I was watching the video. The guy was doing the exact same thing as me.
That's odd.
So, yeah, I'm looking into it, and first off, Sean, to answer your deep lore question, they are not bombs. They are beams that you are shooting.
Yes.
The crash beam bullets is what the deep lore refers to them as. But, Joe, I'm going to not offer you anything great here, but I think it might have to do with the beams then, because either you experienced a glitch, which is probably unlikely, but who knows, or that you need the beams, because I was very similar to Sean in that I was mostly saving these beams for the big core at the end, because I just noticed that I wasn't using them on regular enemies. Regular enemies don't take that much damage to kill, so it was usually like 1 to 3 shots per thing. The beam was saved for the core, so maybe, I'm looking in the manual, it doesn't say anything about it, but maybe it's required. Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess I did use the beams when I could on all the other times I played, so maybe I just naturally was doing that and not really thinking about it. But this particular time, I was definitely out of beams.
It's funny because they even show you it says, beware of the fluctuating force of gravity in the air fortress in the manual, and it shows you like the core, the number of remaining crash beam bullets, right? It's like all these things are like indicated on screen, but it still doesn't quite tell us if we need to use the beam bullets.
I noticed that in the manual too, and it's really just telling you about like one little stage hazard, which isn't really even a stage hazard. It's just like it just affects your flight. So I thought that was just odd placement on whoever wrote the manual. Shame on you.
So I think we're all in agreement that the cores themselves were not boss fights or whatever. But arguably it is a higher tension moment in the Air Fortress than the individual stage parts. When you get there are it's a lot of enemies to deal with. You have to shoot the core. You can't be still. You have to be expending energy. So there is a lot going on in terms of keeping track of your energy level, how many crash beam bullets you kept. It's funny that we're now calling it that instead of bombs. How many crash beam bullets you kept, where the other enemies are, if you even want to deal with them, or if you feel like you can just take their hits while you continue to go at the core. Because ultimately, after you do all that, that's not the like, yay, I blew up the core, like I did it. Now you have to escape. So I don't want to get into like, strategies for escaping or anything. But Sean, I think you were, making it feel really cool about, it's like a heist and you go in there and then once you've blown up the core, it's up to you to get out in time. Do you want to talk a little bit about like how they communicate the urgency?
Yeah. So, I mean, so just real quick, the boss fight is the escape. Not so much in the first or second one because like in some ways it's kind of telegraphed to you. But yeah. Once you destroy the main core, the lights go out and the music changes and it gets kind of ominous. And then, like, you still have control of your character, so it's like, oh, I gotta get out of here. And now you just have to kind of frantically get back to where you may have found your little space segue previously. But then not only is it dark out, it's also shaking, and that's weird. I don't like that. And then if you take too long, it's now dark out and shaking really hard, and now the lights are flickering, and like, oh my god, this game has a better sense of atmosphere than anything that we've played so far. And it was probably the most tense I've felt playing one of these games for this podcast I've ever played. And that's me just sort of, gushing at this point.
Well, I would say that I agree that is one of the most tense things that we played at that portion of this game, as far as like the atmospheric point goes. Because I was thinking the same thing when after you would blow up the core and the music would change and it would get dark and it would feel very like, oh my god, like what's happening? I gotta get out of here. But it also made me wish that there was a little more of that earlier in the stage. Like, I feel like all the stages felt a little like they could have used a little different music and a little more of that atmospheric feel, because clearly they're capable of it at the end of each stage. I mean, did you feel like there was a little bit of a like disparity between the atmosphere and the end of the stage and the early stage? I'm not saying they need to feel the same, but like I feel like every fortress feels the same as the last fortress.
Well, yeah. I mean, I agree that the only thing that's changing between each fortress is how long it takes to get back, or not get back, but to get to like the exit, to find the exit and to get back to it. And there's no theming, like there's no like, oh, this is the one that's based around this kind of maneuvering, or this is the one that you're gonna have to employ this strategy. Like they're all like generic in that sense. But I think like the idea still stands that like at least in the self-containedness of each stage, like it goes from preparation in the shmup to exploration / like low stakes combat in like the middle part, and then like, oh shit, I gotta get out of here in the escape. And well, yeah, like they're not too different from each other. That like those like that cycle like still has a lot of power regardless of any differences between each stage, in my opinion.
Right. I agree.
And it's a nice touch too that they continue to make the ship harder and harder to find, to the point where, in later levels, it might not even be apparently obvious in your exploration where it is at first. And you have to, make that note of like, should I be going to the core if I don't know where the ship is? So it's nice that it's not something that you blow up the core and now it reveals a new area, right? Of like never before discovered part of the air fortress that now you have to quickly rush through to get to the end checkpoint, right? Instead, it makes use of, the backtracking. One thing I wanted to throw out about this game, that, I guess we don't talk about a lot, but I feel like this game was calling for it. The design of the game, in terms of visually, like graphics, it's a little, even though it's fine, right? It's serviceable. It is a little all over the place in terms of sprite design. Like the orange astronaut character that you are, the Hal, I don't know, he's like kind of cartoony. And then like the backgrounds are, kind of epic. And then the enemies, epic in terms of like space and scope and stuff like that, and even just like, attention to detail. But then even like the enemies too, there's like some that do like, they have like 3D designs to them, like pseudo 3D with those tiles that move through space. And
that caught my eye right at the gate, yeah.
Like those things are great. But then there's other enemies too, like even just in that shooter stage, there are some enemies that are as simply colored or maybe like colorful as Hal is, and they don't look like they blend in either. But then there are other ships that look great and they have more detail and they are like grayish to fill in with what everything else is going on. So I just feel like, it's a mixture of like color palette, but also just like design in general, that they didn't have like one look for this game.
No.
There's a couple of different looks being mashed together here.
Yeah, everything they do, though, does feel very clean compared to a lot of games like this where everything, I guess I'm just seeing more and more now as we're getting later into the NES's life that like companies are able to make something that looks both like somewhat textured but also not like absolute crap. Like I feel like early on you'd have to go with like solid colors and look nice, or like try and be like a little more photoreal and a little more textured and just look horrible. And this has actually done both, like not both of those, not look horrible, but it's done both as far as be colorful and be bright and be crisp, but also have texture. But yeah, I do see like a little bit of a disparity between some of that stuff too. Even just the size of you on your ship, because you're a person, you can kind of imagine how big your ship's supposed to be. And then there are all these like ships that are like way smaller than you, a human. So like maybe those are like drones or something, but like overall, I really liked the style of it, but I did see some of those weird things, and it did feel. I think the character of Hal, just speaking on a design thing, in my opinion, could look a little cooler.
Yeah, I agree that like there doesn't seem to be a holistic there wasn't like a design Bible for this game, because you're right, the styles are all over the place. I think one of the things that they were going for here, like the priority was legibility, and that's not just like legibility on the screen space of like how can I tell who's my guy and where the enemies are, because we have played games where that goes out the window, but even just like again like in like putting that mental map of the labyrinth that you're going through in your head, like each stage has to look different, whether in color or in like the grander design of like the structure of it. And I think that was sort of in their minds. I'm not trying to like give them an excuse for like, oh, why do you have solid green over here and then a very almost photoreal like gray girder design over here. I'm not trying to like excuse them of that, but that's what I think was going on.
I think that's a good point to make, because this is not an ugly looking game by any means, and I feel bad bringing it up because it's like we've played much uglier looking NES games that we didn't comment on, like the, we might have commented on like the main character's look, but like we didn't like break it down in this kind of detail. It was just something, I mean, hey, we're getting better at doing the show, but it was also like something I noticed just, because I don't know, like something about the sprite of the Hal guy on the ship is just so funny to me that like it just like it's something that just kept like appearing in my head, because it is something you keep going back to as you continue to do the shoot 'em up stages. It's just funny that it's all a little all over the place, and whether it's intentional or not, or whether they were going for legibility, it's fine. Like it's all serviceable. It's not game breaking by any means. It's definitely not confusing. So I think it's fine.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest thing is actually Hal's sprite was the one that it just looks, I don't know, it's like big head, sort of small body, like not proportionate. It looks like that's where I get cartoony, is from Hal's specific sprite. But yeah, like I don't want to skip over the fact that there's a lot of really cool enemy designs in this too. Like there's one thing that looks kind of like one of the like training remotes from Star Wars, if you guys know what I'm talking about, that like floating orb, and then it like shoots out like one of the, I'm just mashing up other things I know to describe this, but it shoots out like one of the fireball sticks from Mario that spins around that you have to like jump over. Like that was a cool one. There are these like jumpy ones with long legs, and even with the fact that they don't really fit, those sort of 3D tiles being very simple things, I know that stood out to me right away. I was like, that kind of looks like something that would be on the Super Nintendo. Like I didn't know they could like put something in a game like this on the NES.
And while we're talking about stray thoughts here, like design and stuff, I think it was also rude of us not to mention the elevator door system where, like, you go in there and it's your cover spot. You know, you choose when to come out. And that is a cool thought and something that we haven't usually seen. Usually you just go through the door and the screen scrolls you to the next stage and you're just in the elements. A lot of times they'll just put an enemy right in front of your freaking face too, just to like rub in the fact that like, yeah, we didn't care and you shouldn't either. But in this one, you know, there is immediate danger in some of these stages and you have to kind of choose when you want to be exposed to said projectiles.
Yeah, because they'll start shooting as soon as you see them. Like you'll still be in the elevator, the actual elevator moving, and they'll start shooting at you. So it was very nice of them to let us do a little recon before we left.
Yeah, I definitely took advantage of that a lot, but I actually hadn't really thought about it. And I think that kind of is a testament to how much thought they put into little details like that like I'm not even noticing, even though it is affecting my gameplay experience. Like I probably would have noticed if they didn't include it because you notice negative things and you don't notice positive things. But, you know, just naturally. But like, yeah, like notice, like thinking about things like that really makes you realize like, yeah, this is definitely an example of a game that the developers cared about.
Joe, speaking of the developer, this was made by HAL Laboratory, who works very closely with Nintendo on stuff, even today. And, it's unfortunate that Air Fortress does not have a sequels and spin-off section because there are none. Whether you could have made a sequel on the NES, you definitely could have. But even just, a 16-bit upgrade, too. Like, I feel like there was enough explored here in the basic layout of what they had that to take it to the next level and actually throw in the other things that maybe we were looking for or just expanding upon these ideas even. I'm surprised. I don't know. Are we at the point now in the NES life cycle? Because like this is the third episode in a row where the sequels and spin-off section is empty. Whereas like in the beginning it was,
it's crazy.
Here's 12 games. Are we in the point now where it's just like oversaturation in this market and a lot of these games just aren't even being like sold because they're not made directly by Nintendo or they're not like having hot starts right away? Like I could see Air Fortress having a tough time knowing that it's being released the same time as Jordan vs. Bird 1-on-1, which sounds crazy, but I'm telling you, like, which one's gonna sell to the kids? I think we're starting to see the effects of this stuff, and Air Fortress not having any sequels does seem like an oddity because there wasn't enough
crazy.
here.
Yeah, I think that's crazy because, like, what we've seen so far, I see the game developers of this time as a bit more like stubborn and like they'll make it even if there isn't a market for it. And like I know that that's not entirely true, but like there's enough explored here. There's enough like new ideas put forth that you would think it would be crazy not to make another game that sort of explores the same mechanics like on like a grander scale. And the fact that this does not have a sequel is crazy to me considering what we've played that has 10.
Yeah, keep in mind, Town & Country Surf Designs Wood and Water Rage got an NES sequel.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to play it.
Can't wait. But also, a lot of these other games get sequels like, 3 years ago. Or like a sequel came to the Wii U or something.
That's true.
It's weird that like this stuff, these last couple didn't have, have anything like that either.
Yeah, it's a good point, Joe. And maybe, maybe guys, just looking at other things in my show notes here, maybe it has to do with the fact that they were giving out Air Fortress t-shirts if you bought the game. And maybe their whole budget was spent on these Air Fortress t-shirts that I can't find anywhere on the internet. Apparently, legend has it, it's literally just the game's box art on a white t-shirt, which sounds awful, but maybe that's what it is. And if that exists, like, still, I'd like to get a hold of one. So,
I was looking too. I'm
if there's
gonna
anything
put out
out
a
there,
bounty If
There you
if
go.
anyone has one, just name your price and I'll see if I can haggle you.
Now, since there are no sequels and spin-offs, right, and we spent a good deal talking about, like, things that we might have wanted to see or anything like that, I'm not asking you to pitch me your sequel or anything, right? Air Fortress, on some level or another, right, as a sequel, would it have been enough to just release this game with more, with larger fortresses or, new updated designs, right? I'm talking about NES sequels here. Like, would that have been enough, or did we actually need to, like, see a significant change in order to, like, differentiate it enough? Maybe that was the issue with why it didn't come to the NES, a sequel.
Yeah, I feel like it would need some significant change just to... I mean, so many game series, like, find their... like, what they're really good at in the first sequel, Like, I feel like this, there in an alternate history, we could be looking at this game and be like, wow, I can't believe this is, like, the one that laid the base for whatever came next, which, like, expanded on it and made it so much better. I would like to see them evolve it a little bit if they're going to make a Nintendo Switch sequel.
Yeah, I guess, and maybe you did specify, but is this an NES sequel or a...
You did, but
okay,
I changed it.
Yeah, I think if it's like an NES sequel, actually, yeah, any kind of sequel, I would just want to make the focus, like, you could throw the shmup away, find some other way to prepare. Like, make this about getting into a place, doing something, and then getting out, like, really fast. And, like, that's your core game loop right there. And I don't know how you do it. I don't know if, like, you sort of reframe everything as, like, you're a saboteur or, like, a cat burglar or what have you. But, like, there's something there. And if you can make it into a deeper, maybe the preparation is deeper, and you get to use, like, things that you have, like, tools that you've gathered over time to better navigate. Like, I don't know. Like, I think there's a lot going on that can be improved upon and expanded upon. Again, I'm just kind of sad that nobody did.
All right. Well, don't be sad, because there's still one more thing we have to do on this episode, and that is decide whether Air Fortress is on the Essential Games list. Sean, have you cheered up now that you've heard the Essential Games list music?
I'm always cheered up by the Essential Games list music.
Fantastic.
I'm sure it was a nice surprise.
Right. You never know when it's going to play. Sure. Yeah, go ahead and vote, Sean.
Yeah, I've telegraphed this pretty strongly. I've not been coy. I really love this game. And I know that, the shmup part is kind of a throwaway, but at the heart is something that I really appreciate. And that is just, like, the overarching structure of the game. And I know that there's a lot of things that can be improved upon, and I just said that I wish that things could be. But, like, nevertheless, to me, this is an essential game. It's so unique. Play this game.
Joe.
So I was also very happy with my experience with this game, and I think that there's a lot of credit to be given with how it's doing something different than what we've seen. It's unique, and it has that that gameplay loop that gives you kind of 3 different levels of satisfaction, all culminating in this intense, kind of heart-pounding escape sequence. And I think that is really, really awesome. And I don't really have, like, too much to say, like, that this game did totally wrong. I said my piece about the branching paths and how they felt like a little unnecessary. And I'm one who normally likes exploration, but something about this felt a little empty to me, and like it was getting me lost to get me lost. Again, I realize that has to do probably with it wanting you to get lost later when you're trying to escape. But overall, I think that this game, is a great game. And I feel like I'm always under the false idea that in order for me to not vote something onto the essential games list, I have to come up with like a bunch of negatives about the game, or I have to come up with like all the things it did wrong. I don't think this game did anything like particularly wrong, but I have come to the conclusion that I just don't think it's like, I think that I want a little more out of it to get me up to the point where I'm on where I put it on the essential games list. I did feel like as much as the gameplay loop and the what they were doing was unique and interesting, I did start to get bored with it after a while, and I this is not to say that I wouldn't say play this game if you're a big shmup fan. I mean, if you're a shmup fan or not even shmup fan, but like a fan of this genre of game, I say play it. I say like if you can get your hands on it. I just don't know if I can call it essential today. Like if you're not an NES person, I don't know that. Like I'm confident that most of the other games on our essential games list, anyone could pick up and play and probably enjoy. This one, I just don't think it's up there with the rest of them. So I am voting it off. Maybe I'll regret that and change it in the best of 89 episode. But for now, I'm not voting it.
And so for a rare moment, it finally comes to be that I can decide something. Usually by the time I vote, it's been decided.
You're welcome.
So, here's the thing. Air Fortress is a hidden gem on the NES. And hidden gem, I think we talked about like what does that mean and everything like that. I'm not going to get into all that right now, but this is definitely a game that surprised me. And, even like talking about it on Twitter or seeing things about it, not a lot of people are talking about this game. And I think NES fans should be talking about this game more in the sense of like, it is really even if it is just a combination of like two genres or whatever, it is so much more about like, the navigation of the air fortresses and all that. However, I'm gonna side with Joe here and say that it just wasn't enough to put on the essential games list for me. And you're not gonna believe this, but it actually came down to thinking about other games that aren't on the essential games list rather than games that are on the essential games list. And so when I started looking through, like, what do we have like that we all really enjoyed that we didn't put on there? And I think it's fine that that Air Fortress is off for right now, because there are other games that I feel like either we missed or we agreed were like, yeah, these are great games, but they're not quite up there to the same level. I do worry though that you guys just listened to us talk about this game for like an hour, and I said it's a hidden gem, and I'm kind of worried that it's just going to stay hidden now because we didn't put it on our essential games list. So I think if you're like us and you're playing all of these games, I'd be interested to hear what people think now playing Air Fortress, because it is really surprising to me that when you look online, there isn't a lot of buzz or fanfare for this game. Whereas, other games that we didn't necessarily know about or didn't, have like the acclaimed status of like, a Super Mario Brothers or a Legend of Zelda, when you go online, it's generally agreed upon that they're great games, like even today, and people talk about them. I think that was one thing that I noticed even with Baseball Stars was like, do we put a sports game on the essential games list or not? It's like, well, a lot of people are still talking about this baseball game today as like something that influences them or that they still want to play and stuff like that. Air Fortress has like this surprising category of just nobody seems to either have played it back then or know that it's a good game today. So did we make the right call? Sean will tell you no. But, I'd be curious, Sean, to hear your thoughts on mine and Joe's comments.
No, I get it. I agree that there's a lot of games that we've played that I've enjoyed a lot, but due to the sort of amorphous and sort of changing on my mood rubric that we've come up for what makes it a game essential and will always turn into these conversations. Just don't get on it. And even if we have like a quorum at our best of year, may still not, because maybe we forgot about it. So I don't know. Everything is subjective on this podcast, and nothing nothing makes sense. So you can have your like Zelda 2's not on it, and you can have your Air Fortress is not on it, and maybe Color a Dinosaur will. So depending on how I feel that day. So
Color a Dinosaur will be on the
it's all over the place.
I was gonna say, speaking of counting your sheep or counting your eggs before they hatch or whatever
Counting your sheep is going to bed.
Yeah, counting your sheep is going to bed. So don't do that right now because I have something important to say. I was thinking about the actual pressure of Best of 1994. Like the final episode, and like when we officially lock in the essential games list and we have to like think about every game we've ever played. That is a day I dread. I just want everyone to know that. That is not a day I'm looking forward to.
We're going to have to replay every game.
Right. That scares me. So, maybe when we get to that, we should replay them on a podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be like when you beat any of those countless NES games that you have to beat a second time before you get the real ending. We have to do all of nostalgia again before we can finalize the essential games list.
Yeah, we want proof that everybody listened to each episode twice so that they can unlock the final episode.
That's it. Anyway, that's canon now.
Yep. Enough talking about the final episode because we still got many episodes to go. Air Fortress, not an essential game. Let us know how you feel about that. Twitter @NostalgiaCast. Or if you're a patron, guess what? Patrons now have access to Discord with us, and they can just tell us directly. They could be like, tag Mike and be like, you're wrong. And I'm like, hey, Joe voted no too. And they'll be like, no, but I like Joe.
Hey, that's I'm what not you can saying do. To dox them, but right. I'm not saying to dox them.
That's what you can do on the Discord.
Once we get Zelda 2 on, you can say whatever you want to me.
There you go. Still don't say whatever you want. But think about it, so that's the opportunities they have there. But we don't just you don't just become a patron and get a Discord invite. You get so many other things too. We have our other exclusive show to Patreon, Nostalgia Bites, which the next episode is coming up soon. It's a double feature, Exerion and Formation Z. You've never heard of them. You know why, because I've told you a bunch of times now if you listen to this part of the show. They're the Famicom games, but they're completely playable, no Japanese required. And if you're tired of me plugging in a Patreon, just know that everybody who gives us love on Patreon is responsible for funding the website, www.nostalgiacast.com, that you can go to completely for free. No password required, no Game Genie required to get on the internet. That's true, right, Sean?
Well, I mean, if they're paying for it, they technically do need to pay to access. But
they're paying for other people to access it.
You are definitely underwriting every freeloader that sees that website. So feel free to have some self-importance about it.
And if you're just looking forward to next week's episode, just know that it is Back to the Future, the movie, the game. So that's what we will be playing next week. I'm not going to pretend like I don't know anything about this game, but I have not played it. So that should excite some people to know that we are going to go into what is a very often talked about NES game. We are going to go into it blind.
I hadn't even heard of it.
Yeah, we're going to record the whole episode blind, actually. So don't worry about that.
No look podcast.
Yeah, we're not going to look at each other, but we are going to be able to hear each other. We're going to play the game blind.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And we'll see you guys. Maybe we won't see you because we'll be blind, but maybe you'll wear a blindfold when you listen to the next episode just to keep it faithful. That's next Friday. This Friday already happened. You listen to it. It's this episode. So have a great weekend.